G'day viewers, it's Michael here again and welcome back to Single Racer. And in today's video I want to test 7 new car mods that you can install for Automobilista 2. Now these are the only 7 that I'm aware of, because if you come over here to Race Department, they do have an Automobilista 2 section, but it's more apps or skins available for the sim, and there's no cars currently listed, but there is a website that lists 7 cars that you can put into Automobilista 2. But now, just because it's slightly more involved than putting a mod into Assetto Corsa, I'd like to just do a little bit of housekeeping, and that's firstly to thank the channel called RomRom, which was the first channel, at least for me, that made me aware that you could actually put car mods into Automobilista 2. And the second was Sim Racing 604, which followed it up by a more detailed guide on how to actually do it. And like I said, it's a bit more involved, but it's pretty simple once you understand what you need to do. And I'll have a link to this video in the description, because he helped me understand what I need to do to put all 7 cars within AMS2. And so the reason that I'm doing this video is because he's already covered how to install the mods from this website here, Project Cars Modding Team. But in his video, because he was doing the install instructions, he only drove the one car. So what I want to do is test all 7 that you see here and just give you my general impressions on each car and what they're like to drive. And so now let me briefly show you each car that's on the website in alphabetical order. And first up we have this car here, the Alpine A110 Cup car. Next up we have the Ford GT Track Day car, made famous probably by the movie Ford versus Ferrari, a very, very well known car. Next up we have the Ford Shelby GT500 Super Snake Track Day. What a mouthful that is, but what an aggressive and mean looking car it is. And next up we have the Jaguar XE SV Project 8, and at this point I have to say that the liveries that come by default with these cars look fantastic. I mean, this livery looks sensational in my eyes. Next up folks, we have the Lexus LFA, arguably another famous car, more by its unique shape. Some people love it, other people dislike it. I personally think it looks fantastic. And then finally, to wrap up, we have not one but 2 Porsches, including this one, the 2018 911 GT3. And for each Porsche you get 2 versions. You get a touring version that doesn't have the wing at the back, and then this more race-bred style version with a bigger wing to keep the aero down, as you can see here. And so now let's check out the second Porsche. And finally, to wrap up, we have this car here, the 2022 911. Now I'm showing you the touring version in this one, but it also comes as a GT3 with the big wing at the back. And a very, very nice looking car, and a lot of colourful liveries that come with the whole set. So now let's go on track and take a better look at each car and just my thoughts, my initial thoughts on each version. And so now, just before we go hot lapping, let me show you how the cars look in the sim. And 2 cars have their own menus as single cars. So you've got the Alpine at the very top, and if you come down to the very bottom, you've got the Track Day C version, which is the Shelby, and then you have a Track Day B. But for some reason this lot of cars is also in the street cars, and I don't know my Porsches that well, but I think it has to do with the fact that both Porsches have a touring version and a winged GT3, you know, probably a more race-bred version. So both versions have that option, and then you have the other cars listed here below as well. And you know, for whatever reason they chose 2 directories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive each one on 1 lap of Bathurst, and that's because a lot of people say Bathurst is like a mini version of the Nordschleife in that it has so many varied corners, but it also has a long straight to test their top speed. And I'll just give you my initial impressions of each mod with one single hot lap against the same car, just to feel out what they're like. So this is Michael signing out for Single Racer. I hope you enjoy this overview of the 7 mods available for AMS2. See you later, and let's go hot lapping. Okay folks, so let's start with my first impressions of this Alpine. And I've got to say, first up, what a great car, at least in my eyes. It reminds me a lot of, it's the type of car, it's not overly powerful, but very neutral in its handling. You might say like a 50-50 car. And it reminds me a lot of the MX-5 in both Assetto Corsa and iRacing, although I don't play iRacing, but you know, I hear a lot of good comments about the MX-5 in that as well. And so this car kind of prompts you to say, oh, I've got to have another go, or got to have a field of 20 or 30 cars and have a great race. It's just that type of car. And the thing that probably surprised me most was the force feedback. I think this is a great sounding car, but that's, you know, personal choice. But I was surprised how much force feedback I could feel in the car, at least with this style of car. And I was expecting a more generic numb kind of feeling, but this is actually quite good. I wouldn't call it the top of the line by any means, but it just instills that feeling of like, oh, I've got to have another go, in the same way if you argue that the MX-5 does. And so now, as we come down the mountain here, I'm curious to see what its top speed is. Now this particular car has 6 gears. a lot of the cars have more than 6 gears. So as we turn onto the straight here, let's open her up and see what she's like. Take a look around. Beautiful car. Turn the lights on to give you a visual of the lights, and 260 it maxes out at. I've got to make sure I can pull her up now. But oh, beautiful handling car. Really, really nice. If you only installed one of these mods and you liked the MX-5, I think this would be a great addition, especially if you're closer to a beginner than an alien driver. So as we cross the line, let's see what time this first car brings, and we'll see how the others compare. So we got a 225 and I did a 226. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now let's see how the other cars compare to this excellent starting car in Automobilista 2. Okay folks, so here we are now in the Ford Shelby GT500, and just to explain what's been happening is I wanted to dial the AI in the best I could, so I did a few practice laps just to get a feel of how the car handles, what I can expect, whether it's got good or bad brakes, etc., all these types of things. And so the footage that I recorded is live using my VR as we check out the display here, but I'm doing the vocals over the top. So the thing that I found with this car is I would rate it almost as poorly as what I consider the worst car in AMS2, and that's the street version of the Camaro. I just find it I wouldn't say it's awful, but maybe undeveloped is the right way to put it without being too insulting. And the trouble with this car, it had a very distinct problem in that it didn't feel like it handled well. but in almost a Jekyll and Hyde thing. So what I mean is, if you come into a corner where you're in third and you feel you can hold third for the corner, as the car drops revs, there would be nothing, and then it would, the torque or the power would come on exponentially, almost like you had a super turbo, and it just either spun the wheels or would just become so aggressive on you that you'd almost spin. And it just seemed very unnatural, very like a car that should be this age should handle a lot better, even though it's you could argue is like a rough performance car, you know, or a beastly car. And the other thing that I couldn't get over is, in Assetto Corsa, we approach what's called the dogleg at the end of this straight here, and no car in Assetto Corsa, I need to brake before this corner right there. But here I just couldn't pull it up. It was just awful. You know, it just doesn't, it's like the settings don't befit the type of car it is. And I just can't explain it. But I have to preface that to say that those of you with DD wheels that have better force feedback and load cell braking might argue differently. But I just didn't like this car on my Logitech G29. So as we cross the line, let's check out the time here. So the car that I was racing did a 2:24, but I struggled with the 2:31. And the fact that you struggle against the AI so much isn't good. So now let's move on to the next car. Okay folks, so here I am in the 2018 Porsche, and I do have to say at this point, because when I was testing the AI and just testing out the car in general before I started or hit the record button, one of the problems is you're jumping from so many different styles and types of car, you know, from the Alpine to the monstrous Ford Shelby to this. So naturally this felt much more classy, and look at that beautiful, you've got the classic beautiful dash of the Porsche there with the clock and everything. So my initial impressions were, oh, how much better is this than the Shelby? But then its characteristics started to come out a little bit. And the first thing that I found was how much it understeered and how much you had to drive around that understeer. But it also had a double-edged sword where you almost had this lift-off oversteer. And I have to naturally assume that's because the engine's in the rear, so you have all the weight in the rear. Your typical Porsche, reputation, if you like, without disparaging Porsches. They're a great car. But it was interesting that it completely had to dial myself into the Porsche, because see, when I got used to it, I wasn't understeering, but it's when you come in just that bit hot, you could almost feel the weight pushing you there, and I really struggled with understeer until I adapted the driving you needed to adjust for this type of car there. Look at that beautiful dash. Now, this car has 7 gears, so let's see what top speed we are. And now I'm a bit cautious, so I brake here a bit early, and again I had a lot of trouble pulling it up. I gave him a tap. I don't know what it is about the brakes, or just the trouble with braking in these cars, but it just seems a long way to brake, especially for a car like this. So they were the quirks, although I really, really like this car. So now let's check out the time. Okay, so we got a 2:24 each. Now that's perfectly matched. That to me represents the better mod that this car is, and the better car in general. So now let's go to the other Porsche. Okay folks, so as we get ready in this 2022 version of the Porsche, And the thing that struck me immediately was how much more like a race car this is. Now, I don't know anything about the car, so it could be a race car. It might not be. It might be just an incredible performance street car. But have a look at the dials there. You can tell it's got the race bred features where it's got the beautiful yellow LEDs down the side, no clock, and very basic interior. But this felt like a race car much more. But it also made me realise something about the two Porsches. And in the previous Porsche I talked about the understeer characteristic, and to a lesser extent the lift-off oversteer, which I don't feel anywhere near as much in this Porsche. But what it is, it's probably the way to explain it is when you're just generally coming in too hot. So what I'm feeling was through the wheel was like you had your initial turn in, and then it would understeer, and you felt like you had to turn twice as much to get grip back. And I thought, gee, that's odd. You know, it's almost like you're turning and turning before the grip came back or before it wanted to turn. And then when I drove this in practice, it really hit me that what it is you almost say like aquaplaning, in the sense that you're losing grip and sliding. So you naturally want to turn more, but it's still sliding on the tread. And so what you have to do is you have to drive lesser or within the grip, and then suddenly you've got no understeer. It's like the understeer is completely taken away by the way you drive the car, which is similar to my style, slow in, fast out. I reckon all these cars can hit 300, but I don't want to take the chance because I'm struggling to pull them up at an earlier point than I normally do in a Assetto Corsa. But this to me is a fantastic Porsche, and a lot of you DD owners will really like these Porsches. I just am not an alien, so I can't get the best out of them, but I really like them as a mod. So I think these two are much better than the Ford Shelby GT 500 that was to me not one of the best. So there we go, a 221 and a 222. So again, very even and a little bit faster, being a race bred style car. So now let's head on over to the next one. Okay folks, so now we're in the Ford GT, and this was a real eye-opener for me when compared to the Ford Shelby GT500. And that's because being both Fords, I just kind of expected them to handle the same. And what I really liked about the mods that you get from the modding group website is these two cars handle completely different. And what's interesting is if you overdrive this car, it will also understeer. I don't know if it shows here. There it goes, a little bit of understeer, where I have to dial back the aggression and get it to turn in. But what I really liked about this car is that it comes across in its handling and the force feedback as not an understeering car, but a weighty car. What I mean by that is, yes, it does understeer if you push it too much, but across all four wheels, like a very heavy car would. And I thought that was terrific because it was so much easier to handle, in the sense that I wouldn't necessarily call it 50-50, but you could just control the weight. You know, you could control the drift the way you could in a lot of really good classic performance cars. You know, it didn't feel it was doing anything stupid like, to my impression, the Shelby did. It didn't behave in a consistent way, whereas this does. You can overdrive it, certainly, but you can feel the weight consistently across all four wheels, and I absolutely love this car. And I think it does represent a good representation, for want of a better word, of how good this car is in real life. And as we pull her up here, I was a bit nervous here. Can I get her to pull up? And I'm slamming on the brakes to get all these cars pulled up in time, but this one's an absolute beauty. So I would add this to the list of definitely good mod cars that you can put into Automobilista 2 if they take your fancy. So now let's see the time. I was really curious to see how this compared to the Porsches. So the Porsches, I think, got 221 and almost identical. So 221, 222. So that's really, really good to show the classic performance car against the modern one. Almost identical. Fantastic. Now let's move on to the next two. Okay folks, so here we are in the Jaguar, and I've got to say this was probably my biggest surprise. I was, if I were to try and pick which car I thought was going to be the worst, it was probably this one, and probably because I knew already that this would be the least that you would feel in force feedback. I wouldn't in any way use the word numb, but it's not as strong as others. In the Porsche I drove before, you could actually feel, if you came in too hot, you could feel the skipping of the tyres, you know, of the chirping through the wheel, through your virtual race wheel, and your own race wheel. And whereas this car, you don't quite have that feeling, but it's a great car to drive. Oh, it doesn't look that impressive inside, you know, it's not the best cockpit I've ever seen, but I was surprised how much I love this car. Again, similar to the Alpine, I would call it very neutral, and another car that you just want to race continuously, especially against a field of say 20 or 30 cars, whatever you can get on the particular track you're driving. This was extremely enjoyable and a real surprise for me. I really, really love this car as we come flying down. Now, this represents a true automatic in the sense that it has, or a modern automatic in that it has 8 speeds, but even on this incredibly long straight, I couldn't get up to 8th gear naturally, like, you know, when you feel that the car tells you to change gears. I couldn't reach 8th gear. See there, you can almost hear it dying a little bit just to get it into 7th. So I'm curious if any track in Automobilista 2 will let it get to 8th gear. Maybe the Nordschleifer's long straight will be the only one, but an absolute ripper of a car. And this is another one that I would definitely keep personally, at least on a Logitech G29. So let's see the time now. Probably be a little bit slower. Yeah, a 222 and a 223 compared to 21 and 22 of the other cars. But, you know, we're dialing down the performance now. So now let's go to the last car, the Lexus. Okay, so here we are in the final car, the Lexus LFA. I always get them the letters out of order. But what a surprise this car was as well. Listen to the sound of this thing. And I have to say, given my expectations at the start, which weren't the greatest, given that these are not mods that are well known that you could put in Automobilista 2, my standards weren't that high, but I think this is a fantastic car. This car, as well as the Jaguar, seem to scream performance. I mean, the times don't match the performance cars, but they feel fast. I mean, just this sound, it screams. You know, it's a very, very similar, I guess, in a way to a Ferrari, in that it just automatically, by the sound, feels fast, and she handles really well too. I absolutely love this car. I couldn't get over. I was really shocked. I thought this would be a plodding type of car, but it's not in any way. Again, very neutral, very easy to push. I'm having a lot less trouble than even the Porsches. I wouldn't say it handles better than the Porsches, but you know, the Porsches, probably you need to be a really good driver with a really good cockpit and wheel and pedal setup to get the best out of them. You know, they push you, whereas this car is more towards a beginner, so a beginner could probably find this car easier to handle with a simple wheel like my own, the Logitech G29. Now let's rev her out. This car also has, no, actually this is a 6-speed, this is a genuine 6-speed. It was one of the other cars that had 7 gears as well. As we pull her up there, that's what I wanted to say about this car. She's an easy car to drive, but she's feisty. Like, it's a joy to drive, but she does keep you on your toes. So from that point of view, she's a bit of a wildfire, but really enjoyable and a lot easier to control than what I think the Porsches are. So as we cross the line here, there we go, the slowest time of the performance cars, not including the Alpine. So a 2:23 and a 2:24. So I hope you enjoyed this, but I've got a disclaimer to make at the end of the video, so please watch that if you think about putting these into Automobilista 2. Just watch the last piece before you decide and make that decision. So let's head on over there to that bit of disclaimer now. And now, just before we wrap up today's video, I do want to do an important disclaimer, and this is probably mainly for those people that aren't familiar or that familiar with how to install mods in general for either Assetto Corsa or AMS2. And that is because if you come to the website here where you can get all the cars from, they also have not only probably the same cars for Project Cars 2, which they have others as well, but they were ported over so that they would also work in or at least some of the cars in AMS2. And when I was watching Mike's video over at Sim Racing 604, I know of another company, a very famous company, VRC, that does a mod for Project Cars 2. So my initial reaction was, oh gee, I wonder if they could do it for AMS2 as well. And Mike's response was, well, he sort of already asked, but they want AMS2 to be more stable. Now, when I read that, I didn't quite understand because I hadn't gone through the process of installing the mods. But the problem is that when you have the boot folds that you see here, so this one here, it comes with instructions of what to do. And the problem is that you use this little program here, JSME, just like you can in Content Manager, to install and uninstall certain apps and programs. And you use that to install the cars. The trouble is that every time there's an update, you have to uninstall the cars. Now, you don't have to remove the cars themselves. You just, in effect, have to uninstall them from the boot record. You know, it explains it in the text file better, but you just have to be aware that AMS2 literally does an update, if not more, when they do things like hotfixes, but essentially do a major update every month. So if you're willing to put these cars in, you've got to be on top of the fact that for every time you do an update to AMS2, you have to be willing to go through that process of just removing them from the game, doing the update, and then putting them back in the game, as it's all explained here. So I just felt that that's very important, especially the second bit, because if you don't do it, you have to validate the game files and then do it again. So it's a bit of work, but it is worth it. These cars are fantastic, but I just want to make you aware that given that AMS2 still updates basically every month, you have to be willing to be on top of doing that little bit of maintenance just before the update to keep these mods in the sim. Anyway, so now that's it, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful, and please go over to SimRacing 604 to get the full instructions on how to install these mods and get a lot of enjoyment, even if it's only for a little while, you know, whenever you feel like it. So this is Michael signing out for Single Racer. I'll catch you next time. See you later.